I opened the mailbox and started shifting the mail around to see what today's bunch of crap was. Bill, credit card offer. My hand froze as I looked at the envelope, my jaw quivering a little as I read the address on the front and the name of the sender. This hadn't happened in years, not since I'd left college, but I'd felt safe enough to settle somewhere, hoping that the letters had stopped. It had been 3 years since she'd written, but it made me feel like I was a teenager again, fearing that anyone but me would find those letters. From Catherine Mansley to Justin Mansley. Dear brother, it's been so long. You should come see me in the blue. Love, Catherine. I tore the letter up and went back inside, trying not to notice how the paper had made my fingers feel clammy and moist. The envelope, too, had been the same way, moist and difficult to hold. It was like wet paper that had dried badly, but it was always that way. When Catherine sent me letters, they were always like that. I had kept them at first, hiding them so no one would find them, but I burned them now, not wanting them anywhere near me. I picked up the phone to call Daniel, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried to call my uncle, but Uncle Mike was hoping I had seen Daniel. He said he'd been missing for a week now, and everyone was getting worried. I can hear him calling me now as I sit on the floor with my knees against my chest, trying not to hyperventilate. But I know it's useless. That feeling is the closest I can come to drowning, the closest I can come to understanding why Catherine writes these letters. Daniel, Carter, Clint, Henry, they're all gone now. I'm the last one that Catherine hasn't got. When we were kids, or early teens, we would all stay at Grandpa's cabin over the summer. Grandpa was long dead, Grandma too, but the cabin was always called such. My mom and dad would usually come up first to get it ready, and I loved the time before my cousins got there, the times I could just enjoy the cabin. I haven't been back in years, not since we went back for Clint, but I can still remember the cabin. It was more of a lodge than a cabin, and Dad claimed that Grandpa's dad, our great-grandpa, had built it by hand. It was made from the huge old trees in the area, and it had a big area downstairs with 4 rooms above it. The rooms were easily as big as hotel rooms, the Motel 6 kind, and they held our family and the families of my cousins easily. Dad had a brother, Uncle Mike, and a sister, Aunt Claire, and both of them had 2 kids. Catherine was the only girl in the family, other than Aunt Claire, and the youngest. That meant she tried extra hard to keep up with her older cousins, and it often led her to trouble. The time she fell out of a tree and broke her arm, the time she'd bruised her legs and butt jumping her bike over a 15-foot drop, the time she'd nearly drowned at Carfer's Pond, were all times she was trying to keep up with us. We were merciless, too, giving her no quarter, and it must have been miserable for her. We loved to hike and swim and spend time in the cabin, but the thing we all looked forward to seeing the most when we came out here was the blue. The blue was a hole in the woods, more like a pit than anything, with water inside that was perfectly blue, like the stuff inside the jar where the barber keeps his combs. It went 30 feet into the earth, the precipice sheer and easy to stumble into if you weren't paying attention. The water inside was so blue that it hurt your eyes if you looked at it for too long, and it always looked artificial to me. Someone had hung a bridge over it, a rickety thing that swung across on ropes, and my cousins and I thought it was great fun to go and tempt fate by bouncing on it and making it sway. Thinking about that now makes me downright shudder, but all kids think they're immortal. I was 12 when it happened, but it could have happened before then easily. We'd been at the cabin a week, swimming and fishing and generally enjoying our time in the woods, when Clint said he wanted to go see the blue today. He said it quietly because if he had said it any louder, his mom or my mom would have heard, and that would have been the end of it. All the adults knew about the blue and had forbidden us to go anywhere near it. Dad had told us stories about playing on that bridge when he and Uncle Mike were kids, but Aunt Claire had always been too scared to go on that rickety old thing. I think my dad knew that we were going to go out to the blue, probably expected it, and never expressly forbid us to go there, unlike my mom. He knew that forbidding it would just make it more enticing, and if he let us get it out of our systems, the blue would become boring all on its own. I don't think he believed something tragic would happen, but if he had, he might have kept a closer eye on us. We told our mothers we were going on a hike, Uncle Mike, Uncle Dale, and Dad having gone fishing that morning, and they said that was fine, but to be back by lunchtime. We made our way out as quietly as possible, thinking ourselves clever for not letting Catherine hear us, but no sooner had we jumped off the back porch than here she came with a "wait for me." Clint grumbled that we should just run off without her, but that was when my mom poked her head out and told us not to forget Cat. Catherine seemed pretty pleased with herself as she followed us out of the yard, and as we hiked towards the blue, she realized where we were going. "We can't go there," she said, looking scandalous. "Mommy said it was off limits." "Well, Mommy isn't here," said Daniel, "so if you don't want to come, then turn around and go back." Catherine seemed to think about it, but must have decided it was too far to walk back on her own. We were about 2 miles into the woods, and despite her desire to follow us everywhere, Catherine was kind of a scaredy cat. She didn't like being by herself, and it usually led to her getting hurt when she tried to follow us into dangerous situations. She still followed us, but suddenly she was a safe distance away as we made our way towards the blue. When the trees parted and the edges of the pit opened up, we knew we had arrived. "There it is," Clint breathed, the lip coming into view not long after. "So cool." We had seen it a dozen times, but it was always awe-inspiring. The hole was like something punched by a meteor, the edges jagged and uneven. Maybe there was a meteor at the bottom. Maybe it was what made the water so blue, but we had never seen it. Well, not yet. We were only really interested in the bridge that day and cared nothing for the natural beauty. We spent the first few minutes just leaning over the edge and spitting into the water below. We couldn't see when it hit, but we knew it had. If the side had crumbled, we'd have all gone in. Then this story might have been very different. "Let's go on the bridge," one of them said. I think it was Clint, but could have been any of them. It was definitely Carter who agreed, but we all wanted to go. The bridge was what we lived for, the thrill we came back for, and the second my hands touched the ropes of that swinging death trap, I felt the adrenaline begin to pump within me. The bridge was in disrepair from the first time we found it, and it had only gotten worse over the years. It was missing a few boards, the ropes frayed and peeling, and we should have known it was only a matter of time before there was a problem. When we got to the bridge, all of us crowding onto it as we usually did, Henry moved to the front and began swinging it from side to side. The ropes creaked as we all laughed and held on. Henry was quite a bit larger than most of us, and when he rocked the bridge, he really rocked the bridge. It swayed wide over the gap, and we all laughed and joked as we swayed along with it. We'd been cheating death for a couple of minutes when we realized that someone was missing. We looked back towards the lip of the pit and saw Catherine hunkered in the woods. She was miserable, not liking the sight of us trying to throw ourselves into the blue, and didn't seem to want any part of it. We joked and picked at her, but I wish now that I had seen the fear in her eyes and thought better of what we were doing. I should have been a better big brother on that day. "Come on, Cat," Clint said. "No way," Catherine said, grabbing one of the trees like we might try to pull her onto the bridge. "Don't be a scaredy cat," Clint sing-songed, repeating the phrase scaredy cat, again and again as the rest of us picked it up. I didn't pick it up till the last, but I chanted it right along with the rest of them. Catherine was clearly on the verge of tears, but she still had her pride. She stomped over to the bridge, as indignant as anyone could be at 6, but as she came to the edge, she started to look unsure again. Her hands shook as she reached for the ropes, and when Henry stepped out of the way, she walked hesitantly onto the rickety boards of the bridge. Henry closed off her retreat, and she stepped closer to our group as she tried her best not to cry. "All right, Henry, let's get some big swings in this time," Clint trumpeted. Henry seemed all too willing to oblige, and soon the bridge was rocking farther than I'd ever seen it rock before. It was swinging over the blue like a pendulum, and even I was afraid that we might go in. It was pivoting back and forth, the ropes groaning like a ship's mast in a high wind, and I wondered for a moment what it would be like to fall into that blue water. You could only really tread water for so long before you went under, and I wondered how long that would be. Would anyone get back with help before you drowned? I didn't see when Catherine fell off the bridge, but when Henry yelled out a moment later, I looked over and saw her when she hit the blue. She didn't splash, the water just stayed put, and she came up thrashing as she tried to get her head above the crystal blue water. The water must have been thick because she was really struggling to make headway in it. She was calling for help with big, gasping breaths. The bridge had stopped moving, all 5 of us looking down into the chasm and knowing that we were in trouble. We'd been playing where we shouldn't. We had been being stupid, and now someone had gotten hurt. "We've got to go get help," Daniel yelled, and his words were like a starter pistol. I ran for the cabin to try to get help, Daniel and Carter coming with me. I prayed Catherine could tread water while we ran the 20 or so minutes back to the cabin, but I knew that Catherine wasn't a strong swimmer. I didn't expect she would still be treading water by the time we got back, but I prayed to God that she would be. Mom, Aunt Claire, and Aunt Liz were at the table when we ran in, drinking tea and laughing, but they jumped up when we told them what had happened. Mom came running when she heard, grabbing a rope and running along behind us as we went back. My dad and uncle still weren't back from fishing, but Aunt Liz said that she would call emergency services to hopefully get someone down there. The run back took a little longer, all of us winded from the sprint to the cabin, but Catherine had only been in the water for 45 minutes by the time we got back. That wasn't so long, I thought. She could be fine. It turned out it was 45 minutes too long, though. Clint said that she'd gone under about 5 minutes after we'd left, and she hadn't come back up. My mom tied the rope off to a tree, but it was too short to make it down into the blue. She went back for another rope, my aunt staying with us, and by the time she got back, she had emergency services in tow. They brought long ropes and divers, and soon they were in the blue, trying to find her. The diver who went in said the blue was miles deep, and the water was like trying to swim in jello. They went as deep as they dared, but they never found Catherine. My dad and uncles came back from fishing to find my mother inconsolable, and Catherine presumed dead. They didn't have the heart to punish us for what had happened, and all of us said it had been a terrible accident. We left out the part where we'd been rocking the bridge, and they decided that Catherine must have lost her balance and fallen in. They shouted a little that they had told us to stay away from the blue, but they could see how shaken up we were by what had happened. They thought we had been punished enough, but it appeared that something else disagreed. We never went back to Grandpa's cabin again. It held bad memories for the 3 of us, and I don't think any of Dad's siblings went back either. None of my cousins went there willingly again. It held terrible memories for all of us, it seemed, and I think They knew something dark was waiting for us to come back. The first letter showed up 2 weeks after Catherine's funeral. The 2 weeks after we buried my sister were a really bad time for me. I was sad about what had happened to Catherine, but I was also unbelievably riddled with guilt over it. I felt that I had every right to be guilty. I'd played a part in what had happened, but I didn't think I'd been the biggest part. Looking back, my cousins were really the ones that had pushed her to get on the bridge, but I hadn't stood up and tried to protect her either. I'd failed in my duties as a big brother, and she had paid the price. My parents had been talking about back-to-school shopping, something they seemed unwilling to do, and my mother was trying to guilt my father into getting it done. They were both distraught over the loss of Catherine, but my mother had always been a bit of a realist when it came to things. My sister was dead, but I would still have to go to school whether I wanted to or not, and I would need things to begin school with. While they were arguing about it, Mom told me to go get the mail, see if the circular had come in. I think she wanted coupons out of it, but I can't really remember. I would find it hard to remember much about that day when I looked back, except for the letter. I went to the mailbox and found that there was a circular in there. There were also 2 bills, a couple of condolence cards, and a letter in a strange envelope. The envelope felt moist, the paper seeming damp and moldy, and I didn't like to touch it. I started to sandwich it between the condolence cards, and that's when I noticed it had my name on it. From Catherine to Justin Mansley. I felt the other pieces of mail slip from my fingers when I read the name. It couldn't be. Catherine was dead, dragged into the blue by whatever lay below, and there was no way that this letter could be from her. I thought it might be a trick, maybe one of my cousins, but they had all seemed as guilty about what happened to Catherine as I was. Clint hid it behind a constant stream of humor, but he still clearly felt like he needed to hide what he'd done. Like me, he realized that he could get in trouble if they knew that he'd been goofing around, and I didn't think he'd be stupid enough to try to pull something like this. I opened the strange envelope. I didn't want to. I wanted to throw it away, but I had to know what was inside. Even at 12, I knew there was no way it could be from Catherine. Dead people didn't send letters to the living, but I still had to know what was going on. The letter was brief. All of Catherine's letters have been brief. It's your fault. You should be the one in the blue. I just stood there for a moment, looking at the letter. I started to rip it up, thinking again that this was a cruel joke, but something stopped me. It isn't something I can really explain, but tearing that paper felt like tearing pages out of the Bible. It felt fundamentally wrong, and I ended up stuffing it in my pocket instead, as I collected up the mail that I had dropped on the pavement. I couldn't destroy it, but I didn't want my parents to find it either. What would they say if they saw it? Would they know what I'd done? I couldn't risk that. I was in enough turmoil over my sister's death without my parents blaming me for it. I came in and dropped off the mail, sneaking up to my room as I hid the letter in a box of baseball cards under my bed. It wouldn't be the only one soon enough. Over the next 2 months, I got 2 more letters, each on the same day of the month. After the second one, coming about 2 weeks after school started, I started checking the mail every day to make sure the letters didn't get picked up by my parents. I hid them in the same box, each of them reading similar to the one before it. I'm lonely. I miss you. It's your fault. Come to the blue. Come to the blue. Come to the blue. It was October, the leaves already a vibrant orange in the front yard, when Clint called me after I received my 3rd letter. "Are you doing this?" he asked, sounding angry and scared. Sounded like he was shaking something in the background, paper or something, and I asked what he was talking about. "These letters. Carter and I have each gotten 3. If this is you, then you need to stop. We all feel bad about what happened to Catherine, me especially, but this is going to get us in trouble. If one of our parents found those letters, then we could be in serious trouble for what we did. Your sister is gone, man. I'm sorry for it, but this isn't going to bring her back." I knew what he was talking about without having to be told. I told him I'd been receiving them too, and I bet Henry and Daniel had been getting them as well. Still didn't think they were from Catherine. There was no way for dead people to write you letters, but somebody clearly knew what we had done in the woods. Clint said that was impossible. We had been the only ones in the woods that day, or at least the only ones around the Blue when Catherine had fallen in. He said it had to be one of us, and before he hung up, he was going to call Daniel to see if he was the one playing bad jokes. He called me back 20 minutes later and said they were just as freaked out as he was. He says he's been dreaming about the Blue, and he knows that Henry has too. Henry's talking about the Blue a lot these days, and Daniel is scared he's going to tell somebody what really happened. I hadn't thought of that either, but I suppose by then I thought it might be what we deserved. The letters kept coming on the same day of every month, and I realized that it was the same day that Catherine had gone into the Blue. We all received our letters on the anniversary of her fall, and as Christmas came around, we all started to worry about Henry. Henry had always been a big boy, looking like a high schooler, even though he was only a year younger than Daniel. But when he came to our house for Christmas, he looked like he'd lost 30 pounds. It also looked like he might be pulling out his hair. He was twitchy, quiet, nothing like the boisterous boy we had seen a few months ago. Daniel told us that when he talked, it was about the Blue. He said he dreamed about it, drew pictures of it, and in the pictures, Catherine was floating in it. Henry and Clint had been the last ones to see her alive in all that blue, but in the pictures, she was waving at them from the water. He says in his dreams, she comes out of the blue and tries to get him to jump in. She told him that it's nice down there, it's cool and wonderful, that he would really enjoy it if he were to come join her. He keeps talking about joining her, but I don't know how he would. Dad told Mom that we were never going back to that cabin, not after what happened. They're all really afraid that one of us will fall off that bridge if we went back, Daniel told us as we sat around the kids' table in the den. Henry sat at the table with us, but he did little more than move his fork around in his mashed potatoes, not really eating anything. A couple of months later, my aunt and uncle put Henry in a psychiatric facility. Dad told us he was sick, but Daniel said he'd started having night terrors, and he almost completely stopped eating. He couldn't go to school. He wouldn't play. It was like he just shut down completely. Daniel was afraid to sleep in the same room with him, and he really hoped that whatever this place was they had taken Henry to, that they could fix him. A month after that, Henry broke out of that facility and was never seen again. No one was quite sure how he had gotten out without being seen, but Henry was gone. Everything in the room was exactly the way it had been the night before, including the restraints that were still buckled in the same way they had been when the orderly put him to bed. The police thought for sure that they would find him walking along the road or something, maybe in the woods around the place, but they never did. Uncle Mike and Aunt Liz were devastated, but the four of us were pretty sure we knew where Henry was. They'd never find him, just like they never found Catherine. We were all pretty sure he was in the Blue. The facility they put him in was about 30 miles from Grandpa's cabin, but we were still certain that that's where he was. When I got my letter that month, all my questions were answered. Henry came to join me in the Blue. You should come and see him. He's much better now. Daniel and Clint called me later that day, and I told them I'd gotten the same news. "What are we going to do?" Clint asked. I didn't have an answer. Carter went next, though it took him 2 years to do it. Carter was about 2 years younger than Clint, the youngest of the cousins besides Catherine, and he held out only because he and Clint were so close. I don't think Clint's parents ever had any inkling of what was going on with their son, but by Thanksgiving, he was looking the same way Henry had. He was barely eating, and only then because Clint coaxed him. Clint had changed a lot since that summer when we lost Catherine. He had softened a little, and I think he had realized that life was a little more fleeting than he had believed. He said Carter wasn't sleeping, was having nightmares about the blue, and told Clint that Henry was in the dreams too now. Carter was smarter than the rest of us, not that that was saying much, but I think it helped him put off the bad feelings and get through it for a while. Unlike Henry, Carter just looked tired all the time, and when he came to my 14th birthday party that year, the bags under his eyes looked like bruises. "It's not as bad as it looks," he told me with a faint smile. "My parents sent me to a doctor to get some meds that help. Well, not really help, but they let me sleep. They make it harder to get out of the dreams, though." I asked him about the dreams, and despite Clint telling me not to make him think about them, Carter said he didn't mind. Daniel and I sat close, like students listening to a lecture, and Carter reeled a bit as he thought about them, not seeming sure how to begin. "I'm standing on the bridge. It's nighttime. It's always nighttime in the dreams, and I'm looking down into the blue. It's..." He blinked really fast for a few seconds and shook his head before going on. "It's glowing in the dreams. It's always glowing. As I stand and look down, Catherine and Henry come up out of the water and wave at me. They tell me to jump. They tell me to join them. They tell me how great it is down there. As they tell me, I kinda wanna jump. His eyes shut for a count of 5 before he jerks awake with a start. I want to go to them. There's no dreams in the blue, no nightmares or letters or anything. It's just peaceful." He leaned over onto Clint and started snoring, and Clint accepted his weight gratefully. Carter nearly made it to my 15th birthday party, and a lot of that was due to Clint. This whole thing brought us all closer together, and we called each other often. Daniel actually came to live with us for a while, his parents having trouble coping with Henry's disappearance. Aunt Liz was eventually put into the same facility that Henry had escaped from after she tried to overdose on sleeping pills, and Uncle Mike soon moved in with us too. He and Daniel looked sad most of the time, but I think they enjoyed having us close. Daniel had started having the dreams a lot more often, but he was 15 and starting high school, and he had other things to occupy his mind. If there was anyone who could have used our help, it was Clint. Clint had started high school too. He and Daniel were a year older than me, but he missed a lot of days while he tried to take care of Carter. Carter was losing his mind at an alarming rate, and Clint confided that he had started strapping him into bed at night. I caught him sleepwalking to the front door, and he fights me when I try to get him back to bed. I don't know how my mom and dad haven't noticed yet, but I may have to tell them soon. He's like a zombie, and I don't know how he makes it through school every day. A week before my 15th birthday, Aunt Claire called to tell us that Carter and Clint had gone missing. "They both disappeared in the middle of the night," she said tearfully. "I just don't know what to do. The police have no idea, but I'm hoping that maybe they'd gone to your house for some reason and they were safe." My mom said they hadn't, but she and Dad said they would help her look for them. "Clint's bike is gone too. I told Dale that Indian Scout was a bad idea, but he swore Clint was responsible and that he wouldn't just up and leave without telling us." Daniel and I were eavesdropping, and he said we both knew where he'd gone. After my parents left to join the search party, we piled into Daniel's Jeep and went to Grandpa's cabin, as little as we wanted to. Uncle Mike had left him the Jeep when he got his driver's license, but this would be the longest trip we had ever made in it. Grandpa's cabin was about 2 hours from my house, and despite having left a note, I was sure my mother would be worried sick. The drive seemed to take forever, and when we pulled up in front of the cabin, We found Clint's motorcycle out front, and we knew what we would find. It was dark when we got to the Blue, and Clint was kneeling on the ground as if praying. The dirt beneath his forehead had turned to mud, and he didn't even look up when we approached. "I didn't catch him in time," he said through tears. "I didn't wake up until the sun was nearly up. By then it was too late. He beat me here by minutes. I don't know how. I tried to catch him, but he was already standing on the edge when I got here. I begged him to come back, but he just pitched over and went into the Blue. He was right," he said, pointing. "It glows at night." I hadn't even noticed, but as I looked up, I could see it now. The Blue was glowing like the iridescent moss you sometimes found in caves. And as I looked down, I thought I saw 3 people swimming down there. They were looking up at me, but I leaned away before they could entice me over. "Clint," Daniel said. "Clint, we need to go." "Go?" Clint asked, not seeming sure what he was talking about. "Yeah, we need to go. It's too late for Carter, but your mother's worried sick about you. Aunt Claire thinks you and your brother have been kidnapped. Maybe even that the same people got you who got Henry. Let's go back. Let's go back before something happens." "Something already happened," Clint said, his voice husky. "Carter's gone. Henry's gone. And I'm tired of living with these dreams every night. They aren't going to stop until we all go in. And I'm tired of fighting it." "What are you?" Daniel started, but Clint had stood up and sprinted for the lip of the drop before we could stop him. Daniel made a grab for him, but missed completely. We both stepped after him, trying to catch him, but he was over the edge before we could even process what was happening. He didn't splash when he went in, just like Catherine hadn't, and Daniel and I stood there breathing heavily as we watched the still surface of the Blue. When he didn't surface, we walked back to the cabin with only the moon to guide us and called our parents. Emergency services came in to dive in the Blue again, but Daniel and I just sat there in shock. We've got to get some distance from this," Daniel said. "Maybe if we go where she can't find us, the dreams will stop and we can avoid the same fate as the others did." I asked him if he believed that, and all he could say was it was worth a shot. They sold the cabin after that. My Aunt Claire and Uncle Dale had lost both their kids in one night, and they took it pretty hard. Daniel and I helped each other through the next few years, but when Daniel graduated and said he was taking a job overseas, I could tell that the dreams were starting to get to him. I'd kept my grades up, using the sleepless nights to study, and was eligible for early graduation. I'd been accepted into a college 3 states away, something that broke my mother's heart. Daniel wished me luck. For the next 3 years, we just kind of maintained. The dreams got better with distance, and soon I stopped having them altogether. Daniel told me the same and built a life for himself in South America. After 3 years, I almost forgot about the dreams and the Blue, just chalking it up to something remembered wrong from childhood. And as I got closer and closer to graduation, I couldn't wait to start my new life. Then, Aunt Liz died, and Uncle Mike had begged Daniel to come back. Aunt Liz had died of a stroke in her bed, having left the facility years ago. And Uncle Mike was a mess. He had never really gotten over the loss of Henry, and he begged Daniel to come back and help him. Daniel had agreed to come back and help with the funeral preparations, but then he said he had to go back. He invited Uncle Mike to come back with him, saying he could stay with him in South America, but he doubted that he would. "It's only for a couple of weeks, a month tops. I'll be fine," he assured me. Now, he was gone too. As I sit on the floor typing this out, I can hear something I haven't in 3 years. The Blue is calling again. Catherine is calling again. I don't know how long I can hold out. Sooner or later, I'll go join the rest of them. Sooner or later, I'll return to the Blue. The old guilt is still there. It's always been there. I was a fool to think I could run from it. I should have saved myself the trouble and jumped in the night Clint went in. Now, I'm the last. It's only a matter of time before Catherine gets me, too. Ralph walked a lot. Like, every day a lot. He had lost his car a few years ago, during the pandemic. Not because he couldn't pay for it, but because he had a habit of driving drunk, and the cops took his license after the third time, so it didn't make a lot of sense to keep it. He'd walked ever since, and kinda helped him with his sobriety. He was a bit of a mess before that, drinking a lot, showing up to work hungover, eating too much fast food, but the walking had helped him drop a lot of weight, and had kind of made him not want to drink. Walking while you were drunk was kind of miserable, and when walking was your means of transportation, you got pretty good at avoiding things that left you unable to do it. Ralph was coming into town on Tuesday, walking up the sidewalk that led from the trailer park he lived in to the grocery store, when he saw the first sign. It was a normal enough white sign with big block letters on the top that read "Missing." The thing that stopped him was the face that looked out from the sign. It was a guy of about 300 pounds, thinning hair pulled back in a ponytail, deep bags under his eyes. He looked like a deeply unhappy man, a man who looked like he was just looking for a hole to die in. And if it had a beer in it, then all the better. The eyes that stared out of that poster looked like the eyes that stared from between the bars of a drunk tank. And they had, more than once. Ralph reached out and took the sign, staring into eyes that he hadn't seen in years. He was looking at himself, just a past version of himself, a version 2 or 3 years out of date. Out of date was a good way to describe it, like spoiled milk. Missing, Ralph Gilbert. Address, 9733 Aaron Way, Trailer 17. Last seen, April 23rd, 2023, walking along the shoulder of the road. Call Filibuster Sheriff's Office with any information. Cash reward possible. Cash reward, Ralph thought. It was weird to think that someone would be willing to offer a cash reward for someone like him, but he supposed it was possible. The friends he had now certainly valued him more than that bitch of an ex-wife or either of his ungrateful kids had. More than the family he had left too, for that matter. He put the flyer back up, thinking it was weird that they hadn't just come out to the house to see if he was there. He'd been there for a week after the what, he thought. The night that something had happened. Something Ralph couldn't really remember. He kept walking up the street, enjoying the late afternoon as it dwindled towards dusk. This was his favorite time to walk, he thought. The weather was hot, even for early May, and he spent most days inside due to the heat and the way the sun made his eyes hurt lately. The evening walks were about the best thing for him, and he couldn't wait till autumn came and he could stand to walk during the day again. The last thing he wanted to do was lose his progress. 2021 had been a pretty turbulent year for Ralph, but not all of it had been bad. He had started noticing that the walk was making him lose weight and that he felt better about being more active. It would have been very easy to sit on his couch and feel bad about it. He had certainly done that for a while, but as his food ran out and the money he had gotten from his disability payments started to dwindle, he knew he was going to need to do something. That was how the walking had started. Walk to the grocery store, walk to McDonald's, walk to the 24/7 Phil that he worked nights at, and walk home. After a while, people in the trailer park started to notice that he was walking, and they would offer to pay him so he could walk their dogs. Pretty soon, Ralph had a bunch of mutts on leashes, and he became known as the Dog Man. Soon, people came to walk their dogs with him, and Ralph felt he finally had friends. He hadn't had friends, not since high school, and the ones he had never led him into anything healthy. These guys were walking with him, helping him find the shoes that wouldn't pinch his feet and give him blisters, suggesting pants that wouldn't give him a heat rash. And one day, Ralph hopped on the scales and discovered that he had lost 50 pounds. By 2022, it was 100 pounds. And by the next year, he was down to 180 and feeling better than he ever had. His trips to McDonald's were down to once a week. His dog walking was earning him enough money to keep the bills paid and his fridge filled, and Ralph felt better than he had in years. He had felt like that right up until last week when something had happened. As Ralph came into town, he saw more of the signs hanging on poles and was a little curious as to why no one had come to the trailer park to check on him if they were so worried. He'd been there all week, and they could have come and knocked. Ralph had been kind of out of it the last week, though, and he was worried that he might have caught something. He barely remembered stumbling home after the whatever had happened. Ralph hadn't liked that. It reminded him of being drunk and out of control again. How many times had he stumbled into his trailer after a night of drinking to find that he couldn't remember how he'd gotten there? He sat on his couch, just looking at the dark television, and suddenly he wondered where the groceries had gone. That was when he remembered that he'd been carrying groceries. He'd been coming from the Forest Hills grocer, bags bulging in his hands. He'd come around the corner, Matherson's Curve, and then he didn't know. Something had made him squint, and he thought, oh shit, there goes my milk. Then he'd been walking back into his trailer. As he walked into town now, he saw more missing posters, and it started to give him the creeps. Watching his own face, his false face, looking back at him was eerie, and he wanted to rip them down. He was here. He was alive. Why were they looking for him? He wasn't missing. He was walking up the road. He passed people, side-eyeing them as if he expected them to recognize him, but they just walked right on past without a look back. That was weird, Ralph thought. Yeah, he'd been gone for a week, but people surely hadn't forgotten him that quickly. He'd been sitting in his trailer for a week before he'd thought that a walk seemed like a good idea. It was weird. The food should have run out by now, but Ralph hadn't really been hungry. He'd moved between the living room and the bathroom like a sleepwalker, sleeping, sitting up, like he hadn't done since he was still 300 pounds of lazy couch potato. He hadn't felt like he needed to eat anything either, though, and that was rare. Despite his weight loss, he still managed to have a prodigious appetite. He couldn't even remember drinking water that whole week. Until he'd gotten up to go to the walk, he was worried that he was catching the flu. He had wandered around in a daze, just kind of existing, and it made him feel good when the afternoon had finally called to him. As he walked towards the supermarket, however, he suddenly wished he had stayed home. Sitting in the parking lot of the Forest Hills grocer was a green Ford Focus that became the focus of his terror. It shouldn't have been that way. It was just a car, but there was something about it that made him stop and stare. His legs felt made of lead, and his bowels would have turned to water, except he remembered he hadn't done that all week either. That made sense, he supposed. Nothing going in meant nothing coming out. Right? It didn't matter. After a week of no food or water, Ralph should be dead. And that thought seemed to move him at long last. He was suddenly walking towards the car, his eyes falling on a dent in the front bumper. That was a fresh dent, though Ralph didn't know how he knew that. The door to the car was open, and Ralph climbed into the back seat like a sleepwalker. He sat there, waiting for something to happen, feeling kind of silly. This was stupid. The owner of the Focus would come back and ask him what the hell he thought he was doing. He would call the cops. Ralph would go to jail, and then he'd be in big trouble. Well, he said, at least Then they would know where he was. Ralph supposed they could take the signs down if he was sitting in jail. Finally, after an indeterminable amount of time, the owner came out with groceries in a brown paper bag. He was a young kid, maybe 20 or 22, and when he opened the back door, he sat them inside without comment. Ralph watched him move around to the front seat, climb in, and crank the car before driving off. The further they went, the more sure Ralph was that the kid could see him. The kid would look in the rearview mirror, see Ralph sitting in the back seat, and freak out. He might have a wreck, and Ralph would feel terrible about that. The longer they rode, though, without the kid commenting on his presence, the stranger it all felt. Ralph leaned towards the kid a little, meaning to tap him, but as he did, he caught a look at the rearview mirror and stopped. The back seat in the mirror was empty, except for the groceries. That's when he remembered, and suddenly, Ralph wasn't in the kid's focus anymore. Suddenly, he was back on the side of the road, near the guardrail from Matheson's curve, and he could see the headlights in his eyes again. The kid was going too fast, hot-rodding around, and his tires had screeched as he hit Ralph. Ralph's groceries had gone everywhere, his milk squishing under the tire and his lettuce rolling under the guardrail. The kid had come out to find Ralph laying across the guardrail, moaning and groaning as he lay dying. The hit had thrown him back, bringing him to rest against the metal rail, and it had broken his back. He had looked at the kid, begging him to help him, and in his panic, the kid had done the only thing he could think to do. He had pushed Ralph over the side of the rail and into the drop below. It was night now, and Ralph was looking over that rail again. He couldn't see his body down there. It had fallen to the bottom and likely been picked clean by scavengers, but he knew it was down there. Ralph would likely go on to be a town legend, someone who had just disappeared one day after making a slight splash and filibuster. But for now, all he could do was look down into the ravine and wonder what to do next. He had read some ghost stories when he was younger, wrote a few of them when he got older, but it wasn't every day that you became one. Something wafted past him on the stray wind, and when Ralph caught it, he realized it was one of the missing posters. An idea occurred to him, and he thought maybe he wouldn't have to stay a mystery. Officer Vermis stood by the guardrail, ready to catch the kid if he decided to make a nosedive. It was pretty high. He might opt for a short flight over a lengthy prison sentence, but Vermis doubted it. The wind pushed his hair just as it did the officer's jacket, and he pointed down almost accusingly as he turned to the kid. "Is this where you pushed the body over?" Vermis asked. The kid, Tyler Machette, nodded before being taken back to the station in the back of a different squad car. Vermis sighed. That was going to be some hard canvassing, but they would find Ralph Gilbert. When they had gone to the kid's house, he had as good as confessed on the spot, and that had made it pretty easy. He was repentant, very sorry, and very young. Some soft-hearted judge would probably not insist on the death penalty for him. It was unlikely he would ever operate a motor vehicle again, not unless the state prison let him run a tractor or something, but he supposed that that would have to be good enough. It was weird, though. The police would have probably never known about the accident if it hadn't been for the tip they had gotten. Looking at Ralph's picture on the front of the poster, Vermis remembered the night he'd taken his license. He'd been a bad drunk, but he'd turned it around, and Vermis hated that he'd ended up like this. It was a bigger shame that the kid had his life ruined by a moment of inattention, but those were the breaks. He flipped it over, looking at the odd writing on the back. It looked like it had been done with mucus, except it was a fluorescent green, like the slime they used to dump on the kids on the show his boys had watched when they were younger. He didn't know what had written it, and he didn't care. They could take Ralph Gilbert out of the unsolved case files and put him in the closed case files. and that was good enough for him. The message read, "Green Ford Focus, dent in front bumper. Kid hit Ralph Gilbert about a week ago on Matheson's Curve. Body in the ravine. Don't let me rot down there." My brother died last week. It happened very suddenly. He was on his way to work when a semi blew through a red light and smashed his car to pulp. He died at the scene. The police told me that it was unlikely he'd suffered in his final moments. They told me this like it was meant to bring me some kind of comfort. The officer seemed to think I might be in shock when I didn't immediately break down and just thanked him for letting me know and closed the door. They didn't know the kind of relationship my brother and I had, apparently. Very little would have brought me any comfort at the mention of my brother, Gary. That's why I was surprised when a man showed up the day after his funeral. He was a short man, looked about in his 50s, but at the same time he looked a lot older. Wasn't sure why at that moment, but he looked like a man who's wearing a costume he's grown way too comfortable in. He looked like an undertaker. Black suit, bowler hat, boots that looked so old they were ready to fall off his feet. When he smiled, his grin looked right out of a funhouse. He'd flashed that smile full of slanted gravestones at me before starting his business, and it had made me shudder. "Miss Graham, I know this is a very troubling time for you, but I've come to speak with you about a matter of your brother's debt." I sighed. "This isn't a great time, sir. If you could please come back another—" "Ma'am, if there were any way I could postpone this matter, I would. But the business at hand is of the utmost importance." Well, that's what I get, I suppose, for being my brother's last living relative. Gary had never been an easy sibling to have, and our relationship had been far from loving. We were never antagonistic, at least I wasn't anyway, but Gary always harbored a deep sense of resentment for something he felt I'd stolen from him. You see, Gary was born during a time when my parents were probably not doing so well. They had recently bought a house, my father had started a new job, my mother was finishing her degree, and a new baby was less than ideal. My mother dropped out of college to take care of Gary. My father became the sole breadwinner for the household, and this led to a lot of resentment between the two. My brother's first 8 years of life were filled with fights, separations, reconciliation, and a lot of turmoil. By the time he was 7, our parents had begun to get a handle on their debt, as well as their marriage. They began to repair their fragile marriage, and a year later, I was born. This isn't a great time, I reminded him as we sat down at the kitchen table. He just grinned those gravel-gray teeth at me and opened his briefcase. "It rarely is, ma'am. Nevertheless, we must settle your brother's debt before he can truly pass on." I raised an eyebrow at the strange statement, but I listened as he ran through the particulars of my brother's debt. This fit the sort of relationship we'd had to a T. My brother, even in death, couldn't stop stirring shit up. We'd had very different childhoods. Money wasn't as tight when I was a kid, which meant our parents weren't constantly worried about debt. Mom had finished her degree somehow during those turmoil-fueled years and seemed to thrive in her new job. 2 incomes meant the financial burden that hung over their heads was finally beginning to ease back a little bit. Dad got a promotion at work and was suddenly working days instead of nights. He would be home at night to help with the kids and spend time with his family. Mom's new job provided daycare, so she could spend time with me during the day and still maintain a 9-to-5 job. This meant that both parents were home at night to help with projects and homework and generally spend time with the family. Of course, it wasn't all roses, but my birth seemed to help heal the damage to my parents' marriage. The only turmoil I remember was between them and Gary. Having a new sibling meant less time for him, so he did what all kids do when faced with less parental influence. He acted out at home, which got him punished and scolded, but not the attention he wanted. He acted out at school, and his already poor marks slipped lower and lower. It was decided that he would need to repeat the 3rd grade. He became a bully, to hear my parents tell it, and they had to transfer him to a different high school because he got himself expelled for fighting. When he failed the 10th grade at 17, he dropped out. That seemed to be the last straw between him and my father. Their fights got loud, going on at all hours of the night, and then Gary made them physical. Dad never hit him back. Dad was a shouter, but not a hitter. Gary, on the other hand, would get right in his face and taunt him to take a swing before pushing him away or slapping him. Then, one night, Dad just had enough. He told Gary to pack his things and get out. If you're old enough to drop out of school, you're old enough to make your own way, Dad said. And to his surprise, Gary left. I think my parents thought that some separation would show him how good he had it at home, but Gary actually seemed to thrive out on his own. He got a job. Eventually, he got his GED and found his own place in the world. His small success did little to curb his anger or his attitude, though. He became an angry ghost that haunted our house sometimes, coming by to eat a meal or do some laundry. Only if Dad wasn't home, of course. My mother felt sorry for him, and Gary often came around to borrow money or complain about his job or the relationship he was in at the time. For us, however, his absence was far from a detriment. Miss Graham. I realized I'd been wool-gathering and snapped back to the present. I was saying that your brother's debt is the last bit of business on the books, and my superiors are eager to see it settled. I pursed my lips. This was highly improper. My brother was dead, barely in his grave, and this creep was talking about debt. I couldn't imagine what a guy like this would have to offer my brother. I couldn't imagine what this oddly dressed man would have to provide anyone. I doubted Gary could have afforded anything he could provide, for that matter. What exactly is the nature of your business, sir? So far, it sounds a little sketchy to me. He chuckled. Why, we make deals, Miss Graham. We fulfill desires. People desire things, as you surely know, and are willing to pay the price for them. Some want money, some want love. But your brother was very interested in the idea of comeuppance. He had several accounts he wished settled, most of them aimed at people he felt had wronged him. My blood ran cold. What the hell had Gary gotten himself into? My brother's career was, to say the least, vague, but I knew by the constant contact that it was both demeaning and didn't pay very well. Could Gary have gotten himself mixed up with bad people in exchange for some twisted sense of revenge? The man opened a file folder and began leafing through it like a man reliving memories in a photo album. It began when he was 16. His landlord kept increasing his rent. Rent that he held was already too high, and he approached us to represent him. After that, an instructor at his college he felt had it out for him. Then a boss who expected too much of him. A co-worker, a one-time companion. He glanced up at me, and I swore a smile played across his serpent's lips as he delivered the blow. Your mother? Our mom? I said surprisingly. Mom had died very suddenly. She started teaching after retirement and seemed to enjoy her classes in business and law. After class one day, I'd come to surprise her and found her in her office, slumped over her computer. I had thought she was asleep. Mom often slept poorly, when there were papers to grade and lessons to plan. But as I neared her still form, I was horrified to find her bleeding from the ears. I'd called the ambulance, but she was dead by the time they found her. I had hoped they might be able to do something, but the paramedics had just shaken their heads and loaded her onto a stretcher. They zipped her up into a black plastic bag they used to spare the living and wheeled her out to the ambulance. The doctor told me the same thing the police had told me about Gary's death. It was quick. She probably didn't even feel a thing, they said. She'd had a brain aneurysm at the age of 49. Gary hadn't come to the funeral, and that surprised me. Mom had always tried to referee between Dad and Gary. She'd even taken Gary's side a few times when he had made a good point or he'd been right. They'd fought the day before she died, though, a vicious phone argument where she told him that it was time to grow up and stop complaining all the time. If you hate your job and your life so much, then change it. I can't keep giving you money if you're not going to do anything responsible with it, she had told him. Without him, it had just been me to take care of my grieving father. Our mother had a brain aneurysm, you sick fuck. For you to even suggest that Gary had anything to do with this is ridiculous. Don't misunderstand, Miss Graham. Your brother merely called in for mediation. I was the one who did all the work. It was, as it happened, some of my best work. He said it with an almost wistful tone. I think you better leave, I told him hotly. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's not. Then, of course, there was the business with your father. I stopped, unable to speak. What could I say in the face of this pronouncement? The man was, what exactly? Claiming to have killed my mother with a brain aneurysm, and my father with, what exactly? Had Gary promised him money? A portion of his inheritance? My blood ran cold. Was he here for me? Dad's health deteriorated quickly after Mom died. At first it was a lack of appetite and a general feeling of hopelessness. By the end of the first month, though, his body had stopped taking nutrition at all. Anything he ate would come back up, and he'd stop sleeping thanks to the vivid night terrors that woke him up every time he dozed off. He'd become a human skeleton, an old man before his time, and I had to take a break from college so I could come home and take care of him. It seemed I also had to take care of my mother's problem, that being Gary in the complaint department. He would call or just come by to do laundry and wanted to complain about his job, his life, and whatever else there was to bitch about. If I tried to turn the conversation away from this, or refused to give him money, which I did often, he would rail at me for having it so easy. You can come home anytime. Mom and Dad bought you a car, paid for your college, and never pressured you to get a job, and never kicked you out of the house either. On and on and on and on. Gary had constructed a flawless narrative that painted himself as the hero, the victim, and everyone else just out to get him. He also asked about Dad to be sure he was still alive, as though the screaming or vomiting from the back of the house wasn't a big enough indication. I thought I caught him smiling a few times when I told him about how Dad was doing pretty poorly, and it seemed like a twin to the one now worn by this ghoul in the black suit. As his condition got worse, so did the night terrors. He didn't speak after Mom died, not a single word while awake, but he screamed her name every night. He would sit up in bed and swipe the air with his hands balled into fists as though fighting something off. He called her name again and again as he thrashed and moaned and finally crashed out of bed and woke himself up. He broke bones in those falls, but his broken limbs were never allowed to fully heal as he thrashed and fought every night that he lived. The doctors gave him 3 months after he stopped taking nourishment, but Dad fought on for 6 until he finally succumbed to a heart attack. When I found him on the floor of his bedroom, my sobs were tempered with relief. He wouldn't have to fight anymore, it seemed. Gary didn't come to his funeral either. I didn't see him until the reading of the will. I sat beside him in the lawyer's office, feeling my hands aching to claw his face. How dare he show up to get his prizes and slink back to his hole? How dare he show his face here after not even bothering to come to our father's funeral? I could barely process what the lawyer was saying over my own seething rage. My parents weren't wealthy, but they had left things for us in their will. They left me the house, Mom's car, the stocks and bonds that Dad had in a lockbox, and most of their money. Gary was left with a savings account Mom had set up, Dad's truck, some keepsakes, and Granddad's hunting lease. All in all, it was very generous of them, given their relationship with Gary and how antagonistic it had been. Still, you'd have thought they had left him the contents of their toilet. Gary raged. He was the oldest. He should have been given more. This was just like them to spurn him even in death. Before he could go on, though, I cut him off with a loud slap across his face. He was too surprised to speak, so I spoke for him. You want more, Gary? Well, where were you when I was planning Mom's funeral? Where were you when I was changing Dad's bed sheets and feeding him soup? Where were you when I was trying to get him in bed every night so he wouldn't hurt himself during his night terrors? I've taken care of our father for the last 6 months. I've taken care of the household duties, planned 2 funerals, and through it all, you weren't there. Worse, when you were there, you did nothing. You want more, Gary? Go fuck yourself. That seemed to galvanize him. His face went from surprise to furious in the span of a heartbeat. He strode from the lawyer's office without a word. He slammed the door behind himself, and I wouldn't see him again for 2 weeks. Not until I had to identify his remains. Did you kill Gary too? The man steepled his fingers and stared at me. No. Your brother's death was unforeseen. No one expected him to die so suddenly, especially at his age, before our debt with him was paid. I blinked. Your debt to him? Exactly. Your brother had approached us about another settling of affairs before he passed away. I already felt like I knew whose affairs my brother meant to settle. He wants to settle my affairs, doesn't he? The man actually looked a little sorrowful. I'm afraid so, ma'am. Normally we would offer you a chance to counter the offer. We certainly gave your mother the option, though I don't think she understood what was being discussed. Since payment on your affairs has already been received, though, I'm afraid it cannot be undone. I just stared at him. I know people who would beg. I know people who would threaten. I know people who would try anything to stop their fate from being sealed, but honestly, after learning that my brother had been responsible for our parents' deaths, I felt nothing but a deep sense of calm. When you know that there's nothing you can do to escape your fate, it's best to just accept it and get on with it. How will it happen? That's actually why I'm here today. Your brother and I never worked out the details of your settling. Your brother requested several extensions to find a unique and painful way to serve you your comeuppance. But, sadly, he died before he could decide on an appropriate means for your death. Our contract cannot be fulfilled until a method of your death has been agreed upon, and that is what brings me to your home today. And so, that's how I came to choose the time and manner of my own death. It seems weird at the age of 22 to plan your own demise, but I'll be the first to say that it's actually quite comforting. I'm sure my vindictive older brother would have concocted some grisly and painful ends for me. It delights me to know that I've avoided his hateful schemes. I hope it gives him no comfort, wherever he is, to know that all his hateful plans have been thwarted by nothing more than common bureaucracy and the providence of a well-timed semi. I told the man in his undertaker's suit that I wanted to die peacefully in my bed at the age of 106. He smiled wickedly as he read it and bowed low as he took his leave. I write this now, hoping that my brother will read this in whatever hell he's rotting in for all eternity. His debt was one I never minded settling. My brother and I worked for a cleaning company in our hometown. We're both still in high school. He's a junior and I'm a senior. So it was either this or fast food. The owner is a friend of Dad's. We'll call him Chuck to protect the innocent. Chuck's a nice enough guy. My brother and I have known him since we were young. But he leaves a lot to be desired as a businessman. Don't misunderstand. The guy makes money. But he seems to think that employee safety comes after profit. My brother and I worked like dogs for him all summer, cleaning out people's yards and moving boxes out of abandoned houses. Anything to make a buck, I guess. It was nearly July when Chuck got a call from another of his old friends, Philip O'Dare. If Chuck is a little underhanded in his business practices, then Philip is a goddamn pirate. He's the town's #1 real estate agent, and I mean everything when I say that he sells everything. He owns a pawn shop, broke brokers, with his younger brother. When he wasn't out selling houses, he was looking for homes to buy. The homes he picks up are rough, most of the time. If he were selling them a fixer-upper, that would be okay. The problem is that after he picks up these houses for next to nothing, he does shoddy Band-Aid repairs on them. Then he sells them for top prices, usually to pick them back up a few years later when the occupants move out in disgust. My current situation is thanks in part to Philip's underhanded renovations and Chuck's less than stellar business sense. The Foskey place? I asked. I didn't even know Mr. Foskey was dead. Chuck looked up from his notepad, his gray hair making him look like a cloud with glasses. He's not. Foskey's son sent him to Golden View and sold his house to O'Dare Real Estate. That made me a little sad. Mr. Foskey had been my English teacher when I was in middle school, and he had also taught Dad when he was in 8th grade. My brother had not been what you would call an advanced English compatible student, so he didn't get him. But Dad and I both agreed that Mr. Foskey was the best. He always had such cool lesson plans and exciting books in his class library. He challenged his advanced students to be more than a title and wanted us to be more than just A-plus students. I was sad to hear that he had been fired a couple of years ago. He had started to get a little senile in his old age. Everyone said so. And his taste in books had always been a little esoteric. After he'd been fired, he'd become a hermit. He only came out at night, and the word around town was that he'd been going through people's garbage. What he sought was anyone's guess, but people came to visit him and said his house was full of junk. Now he was gone, off to the mental hospital in the next town, and we were left to clean up his house. Phil says to save anything that looks valuable. Apparently the guy had a ton of old books that were probably worth money. Foskey's son sold Phil the house and everything in it, so don't bother saving anything sentimental. A couple of weeks in the puzzle factory and the old man probably won't even remember his own name. I left before I could say anything stupid. The thought of a brilliant man like Mr. Foskey losing his mind in a place like Golden View made me sick at the time. Now, I think it might be exactly what he deserves. We arrived at 6 a.m. Philip was waiting for us, a cell phone against his ear and a latte in his other hand. He was dressed in his usual blue suit, and I imagine we looked pretty shabby next to him, in our jeans and black t-shirts with the company name on them. My brother had rolled the sleeves up on his motorcycle boots peeking out from beneath the cuffs of his new jeans. He was going through some kind of James Dean phase, but it really just made him look like an extra in Grease. We waited for Philip to finish, and when he did, he looked at us like we were in the way. Well, what are you waiting for? A breakdown on what exactly we're doing, I said a little hotly. Thought you boys were smart. Clean the damn house and save what can be sold. Old bastard bought the house 5 years ago after his kids moved out. It's a 1 bedroom, 1 bath, and I have a client who wants to see it Wednesday, so if you could not take all week about it, that would be great. We'll take a look and let you know by the end of the day, okay? He scoffed again, clearly saving all that charm for his clients. Just have it done. I'll pay you double if you can finish it by Wednesday. You, not your boss. That was a tempting offer. Chuck was great, but he tended to be a little tight with the checks. We were being paid under the table, so we couldn't really argue, but some extra cash would be sweet. I shook Philip's hand, and he said to have it done by Wednesday. He nodded and left, the sound of his T-Bird cutting up the road as he went. I immediately regretted my words when I saw inside the house. The house had a strange floor plan. There was a living room, a dining room with a bar that overlooked from the kitchen. Off the kitchen was a bathroom, and a door to get out back where you could sit in a small backyard. Off the living room was another door that I guessed was to the bedroom. The house had a strange sort of feel to it when you came inside, and I could believe that such a place would draw Mr. Foskey to it. It was eccentric in a practical way, a way that he would have understood. The living room dining room was full of trash and furniture, stuffed floor to ceiling, and I could see a little walkway from the living room to the kitchen. The kitchen was spared the worst of it, but it was still covered in garbage. The floor was a solid foot of garbage. The cabinets were covered in old food wrappers, and the refrigerator seemed clean, though it wouldn't open due to the junk on the floor. The cabinets were stuffed with garbage, and I sighed as I thought about the job at hand. This looked like a good week's worth of work between the living room and the kitchen alone. I'll take the kitchen, you take the living room. Whoever finishes first will help the other. Why do you get the kitchen? Rolled my eyes at it. See a lot of furniture in there, football star. You got Dad's build, so you do the heavy lifting. Guess that means you got Mom's build, so I guess you can get your bitch ass in the kitchen, said with a laugh. We put on our respirators, rubber boots, and thick gloves. We hadn't seen anything that would make us break out the hazmat suits yet, but I like to be safe. We were definitely working with some old refuse, possibly refuse that had been outside, which meant that rodents were a danger, as well as insects. We were cleaning out a shed like this not even a month ago and ran upon a secret hornet's nest. That had made us wary about attacking big mounds of trash, so I was careful to look where I was putting my hands as I started in the kitchen. I got lucky. The trash was mostly dry and clean, and it was easily bagged up. I heard my brother straining and grunting in the living room, and I looked out to see him wrestling with a sizable piece of furniture. He was dragging it out onto the lawn. Philip had a mobile storage unit pointing out front, and then loading them into the unit. I watched him groan as he tried to lift an antique dining room table, which had been the linchpin on a large pile of garbage before going to help him. The pile fell over as we freed the table, and I helped him lug it out onto the yard. This is how we spent our first day, at least till mid-afternoon. By 4, I had all the garbage out of the kitchen. My brother had gotten most of the furniture out of the living room and was wiping sweat off his brow as he stuffed papers into a bag. Doesn't this guy have AC? I haven't seen a thermostat. Maybe it's in the bedroom. My brother stood up and walked to the door, coming off the living room. As he opened it, I heard him whistle and came to see what he had found. Inside the bedroom was a tunnel of solid junk. It snaked to the left, getting dim inside, and the tunnel looked as though someone had cut it out of solid junk. You sure you want to go in there? I asked. He just rolled his eyes and took a pen light out of his pocket. This shouldn't take long, he said as he tromped into the room. I stood for a few seconds, making sure the whole pile wouldn't just fall over, and went back to work in the kitchen. Should have gone with him, maybe been a little more attentive, but I was in a hurry and really wanted to have a look at the bathroom before quitting time. I got all the garbage bags out of the cabinets, stuffed 6 bags with nothing but trash. I unearthed the sink and the microwave and had started cleaning the countertops when I noticed something wasn't right. The trash was still in the same place my brother had left it, and the door to the bedroom still hung open. Was he still in there? There was no way it had taken him an hour to navigate the bedroom and find the thermostat. I called his name into the bedroom. The name almost seemed to echo down the trash hall, but there was no answer. It was starting to get close to sunset, and I really wanted to be out of here before dark. Thinking maybe he had fallen or gotten hurt in there, I grabbed a headlamp and headed into the trash maze. I turned the corner and was bombarded by the claustrophobia of the trash tunnel. The tunnel was a solid mass of trash that seemed almost sculpted. It was like someone had built a wall out of mortar and trash and then cut a tunnel out of it. There was a soft light coming from the garbage wall, and when I turned off my headlamp, I found I could see. The dim light seemed to be coming from something inside the wall, but even with the headlamp on, I couldn't tell what it was. It made navigating the strange, winding maze a little easier, but the size started to unsettle me as I moved. The bedroom was supposedly 12 by 12, but this maze seemed to be winding on farther than the whole house. I'd been taking turns for several minutes when I came upon the first strange sight. Coming around a bend, I came face to face with a small library. A small grotto held 4 bookcases, stuffed with old-looking books. Many of them were covered in mold, and as I got close, I could see bugs moving across them. I backed away and kept walking, not sure how deep this rabbit hole went, but wanting to be out more and more with every step. I kept looking down periodically, seeing if I could see a print from my brother's big rubber boots in the dust. I was looking for any sign that he had passed this way, but I was coming upon nothing so far. Then I came upon the old man. I turned a corner and found myself in a 10 by 10 park with honest-to-God grass. There was a lamppost that spilled light over the old park bench, and an old man sat on it, feeding real pigeons. As I approached, he patted the bench as though he wanted me to sit. One look at the old man told me that I did not want to sit there. He was dressed in a long coat, looked patched and frayed, a fuzzy old cap obscuring his face. He patted the seat again as I approached, but I had already decided that I would not be stopping. The whole situation was a little creepy, and I intended to just walk on and continue on my way. When his hand shot out and grabbed me, I nearly jumped a foot. His hand was covered in thick green mold, and when he looked up, I could see the same mold growing on his face. He grinned his gap-toothed smile at me, and for a moment I thought it was Mr. Foskey. His grip was firm but moist, and when I pulled away, his hand slipped off and he sat there, grinning at me. Something clamped down on my ankle then, and I looked down to see that he was feeding rats. These were wharf rats, too, no cute pet shop mice, and as they tried to scuttle up my rubber boot, I kicked out at them and turned to run. The old man was standing then, a creaky moan coming from his dusty throat. But I was out of the park and into the tunnel again. I ran, flat out, and as I ran, I imagined I could see lights in the wall reaching out for me. Their brightness came reaching out towards me, and I ducked away from them as I came. The tunnel seemed to be nightmarishly claustrophobic as I ran, and I began taking turns at random. I had no idea where I was or where I was going. I only knew that I wanted to be out. I prayed that this tunnel would end, and I would just flop out on the carpet of the dirty living room, that my brother would be waiting there for me. He would wonder where I had been and what had taken me so long. We would leave, never come back to this place. Screw Adair. Screw his money, too. As I stopped panting, clutching the stitch in my side, I just wanted to be out. That's when I heard the footsteps. They echoed strangely up the tunnel. They filled me with a deep sense of dread. Was it was it the old man coming after me? Some new form? I didn't know, but the steps were heavy and ominous, and I knew that I did not want them to find me. I hid around the corner in a little trash alcove and shuddered in my cowardice. The steps grew closer. I was shaking all over. The footsteps were slow and knowing. I just knew it was some kind of new monster that wanted me. It was some mold monster that was trying to invade me like it had invaded the old man. It was the old man who wanted to breathe spores into me and infect me. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't care. At that moment, I just wanted to leave, and I was willing to kill to get out of here. Clump, clump, clump. I saw a rock on the ground. Clump, clump, clump. It looked jagged, broken, like a paving stone. Clump, clump, clump. I picked it up and held it against my chest. Clump, clump, clump. I closed my eyes and steeled myself for what I was about to do. Clump, 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 clump. I rounded the corner and swung the stone, and it connected with something that immediately staggered back, bellowing. I swung it again, but it hit me around the waist and drove me to the ground. I dropped the rock in the skirmish, and as it rolled away, I felt hands close around my throat. It was choking me, choking the life out of me, and as I groped around, I could see little black swirls at the corners of my vision. I swung my fist out at it, but without oxygen, it was a weak swing at best. I went back to groping, trying to find something, and finally, my hands settled on something hard and jagged. I grabbed the rock and swung it, filling my lungs with air as the hands loosened, and the shape fell away. I lifted the rock and swung it down at the shape, hitting it in the head. I straddled it, swinging it again and again and again, until it finally stopped moving. I was panting then, out of breath, covered in sweat, but I felt my breath escape in a sudden whoosh when I flipped on the headlamp. I was choking again. I could not find any air. I was straddling a human being, his face mostly caved in, but the rolled up shirt sleeves were a dead giveaway. He was wearing our shirt, the shirt with the two happy moving men on the front, and as I threw the rock away, the tears began to flow. I jumped off him and ran, leaving him in the tunnel to God only knows what. I ran in a blind panic. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, and I just kept running. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs heaved. I bumped into the walls and saw them crumble around me. As they fell, I felt the trap envelop me. I embraced the entombing refuse as my fate. I had killed my brother. I deserved to be encased in garbage for all eternity. I deserved it. I deserved it. I. I. I could see flashing lights and was aware of being carried. I opened my eyes to see two paramedics rolling me into an ambulance. Chuck was following behind them, clearly panicked. Philip was there too, but he looked more aggravated than worried. As we drove away in the ambulance, I looked around. They seemed to become aware that I wasn't unconscious. What what happened? I asked, and the two of them filled me in. Philip had come out after dark to check on our progress. After finding the house mostly still cluttered, he had called Chuck and told him to get down there. The house was still a disaster, and his workers were nowhere to be found. When Chuck arrived, they found me passed out in the living room under a pile of garbage. They had called the paramedics, fearing I had broken my neck, and had then come to check me out. Paris says you're lucky to be alive, honestly, said Chuck. Philip elbowed him, wanting him to shut up. Why? I asked. He said the whole place was crawling with black mold. It was around the crown of the ceiling, the baseboards. Hell, the whole place was ate up. It's a good thing your brother left early, eh? I told Chuck I didn't remember him leaving. I told him about the bedroom, the tunnel, the strange things I'd seen there. I don't think Chuck believed me, but they did go back to the house to look for him. They came to see me in the hospital later that night, told me they hadn't seen a hide nor hair of him. He wasn't at home. They'd called Dad, and his truck was still at Chuck's place. They didn't know where he was, but they were sure he would turn up. I didn't answer that. A week later, they let me go, and I went back to the house. It's still a mess. The guys Philip got to clean it aren't as diligent as my brother and I, but they're great at leaving doors unlocked. I stood before the bedroom door like I expected it to open on its own and suck me in. It didn't, and when I finally opened it, I found not a tunnel, but a cluttered bedroom on the other side. Just a bedroom. No tunnel, no monsters, just a regular old bedroom. It's been 2 weeks, and no one's seen my brother. He's lying dead in some weird trash tunnel with his head caved in. A part of me knows this, but a part of me also knows that there is no trash tunnel behind that door. I don't know what to do. Dad is getting worried. The police have no leads, and I can't find the tunnel. I killed him. It's my fault. But if I tell people the story, they're going to lock me up in Golden View right along with Mr. Foskey. I went to visit him a few days ago. No one's monitoring who visits the residence at Golden View. When I asked him about the trash tunnel and the glowing mold, he just stared at me blankly. I begged him to tell me, screamed at him to help me find my brother, but whatever light was in Mr. Foskey when I was in his English class is gone now. Now he just sits in the day room and watches soap operas with the rest of them. I don't know what to do. How do I get my brother back? What will happen to whatever poor sap buys the house next when they open that door? Will they find their familiar bedroom? Or will they be the next victim of... Charles stepped into Funland Amusement and ground his teeth at the sight of children playing skee-ball and air hockey and the waka 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 of Pac-Man that filled the air. The Great Gizmo, reduced to playing chess in a place like this. The owner started to say something to the well-dressed gentleman, but Charles waved him off. He didn't need directions. He and Gizmo were old friends, and he could practically smell the old gypsy from here. That was one of those words his great-great-grandchildren would have told him was a cancelable offense, but Charles didn't care. Much like the Great Gizmo, Charles was from a different age. Charles had first met Gizmo in 1919, when the world was still new and things made sense. It had been at an expo in Coney Island, and his father had been rabid to see it. They say it's from Europe, and it's been touring since the 1800s. It's supposed to play chess like a grandmaster, Charlie boy, and they claim it's never been beaten. I want you to be the first one to do it, kiddo. Charlie's father had been a trainman, an engineer, and a grease monkey who had never gotten farther than the 5th grade. He had learned everything he knew at the side of better men, but he knew Charlie was special. Charles was 9 and already doing high school math, and not just reading Shakespeare, but understanding what he meant, doing numbers good enough to get a job at the broker's house if he wanted it. His father wouldn't hear of it, though. No genius son of his was going to run numbers for bingo boys, not when he could get an education and get away from this cesspool. Education, Charlie, that's what's going to lift you above the rest of us. Higher learning is what's going to get you a better life than your old man. One thing his dad did love, though, was chess. Most of the train guys knew the typical games: cards, dice, checkers, chess. But Charlie's dad had loved the game best of all. He was no grand master, barely above a novice, but he had taught Charles everything he knew about it from a very young age. Charles had absorbed it like a sponge. He was one of the best in the boroughs, maybe one of the best in the city, and he'd taken third in the Central Park chess finals just last year. And that was against guys 3 times your age, kid, his dad had crowed. Now, he wanted his son to take on the Great Gizmo. The exhibition was taking place in a big tent not far from the show hall, and it was standing room only. Lots of people wanted to see this machine that could beat a man at chess, and they all wanted a turn to try it out. Most of them wouldn't, Charlie knew, but they wanted the chance to watch it beat better men than them so they could feel superior for a little while. Charles didn't intend to give them the satisfaction. The man who'd introduced the thing was dressed in a crisp red and white striped suit, his flat-topped hat making him look like a carnival barker. He had thumped his cane and called the crowd to order, his eyes roving the men and women as if searching for the right victim. "Ladies and gentlemen, what I have here is the most amazing technical marvel of the last century. He has bested kings, geniuses, and politicians in the art of chess, and is looking for his next challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Great Gizmo." Charles hadn't been terribly impressed when the man tore back the tarp to reveal the thing. It looked like a fortune teller, dressed in a long red robe with a turban on its head, boasting a tall feather and a large gem with many facets. It had a beard, a long mustachio that dripped with rings and bells, and a pair of far too expressive eyes. It moved jerkily, like something made of wires, and the people oohed and awed over it, impressed. "Now then, who will be the first to test its staggering strategy? Only $5 for the chance to best the Great Gizmo." Charlie's father had started to step forward, but Charles put a hand on his arm. "Let's watch for a moment, Dad. I want to see how he plays." "You sure? I figured you'd stomp it first, and then we'd walk off with the glory." "I'm sure," Charles said, standing back to watch as the first fellow approached, paying his money and taking a seat. This was how Charles liked to play. First came the observation period, where he watched and made plans. He liked to stand back, blending in with the crowd so he could take the measure of his opponents. People rarely realized you were studying their moves, planning counter moves, and when you stepped up and trounced them, they never saw it coming. That was always his favorite part, watching their time-tested strategies fall apart as they played on and destroyed themselves by second-guessing their abilities. That hadn't happened that day in the tent at Coney Island. As much as he watched, and as much as he learned, Charles never quite understood the strategies at play with the Great Gizmo. He stuck to no gambits, he initiated no set strategy, and he was neither aggressive nor careful. He answered their moves with the best counter move available, every time, and he never failed to thwart them. After 5 others had been embarrassed, to the general amusement of the crowd, Charles decided it was his turn. "A kid?" the barker asked. "Mister, I'll take your money, but I hate to steal from a man." His father had puffed up at that. "Charlie's a chess prodigy. He'll whip your metal man." And so, Charles took his seat, setting eye to glass eye with the thing, and the game began. Charles would play a lot of chess in his lifetime, but he would never play a game quite that one-sided again. The Great Gizmo thwarted him at every move, countered his counters, ran circles around him, and by the end, Charles wasn't sure he had put up any sort of fight at all. He had a middling collection of pieces, barely anything, and Gizmo had everything. "Checkmate," the thing had rasped, its voice full of secret humor, and Charles had nodded before walking away in defeat. "No sweat, Charlie boy," his father had assured him. "Damn creepy thing's a cheat anyway. That's what it is, just a cheatin' bit of nothing." Charles hadn't said anything, but he had made a vow to beat the pile of wires next time the chance arose. Charles saw the Great Gizmo sitting in the back of the arcade, forgotten and unused. He didn't know how much the owner had paid for it, but he doubted it was making it back. The Great Gizmo was a relic. No one came to the arcade to play chess anymore. There was a little placard in front of him telling his history, and a sign that asked patrons not to damage the object. The camera overhead likely helped with that, but there was likely more to it than that. The Great Gizmo looked like something that shouldn't exist, something that flew in the face of this uncanny valley that his great-grandson talked about sometimes, and people found it off-putting. Charles, however, was used to it. "Do you remember me?" he asked, putting a quarter in as the thing shuddered and seemed to look up at him. Its robes were faded, its feather ragged, but its eyes were still intelligent. "Charles," it croaked, just as it had on that long-ago day. Charles had been in his second year of high school when he met the Great Gizmo for the second time. School was more of a formality than anything. He could pass any test that a college entrance board could throw at him, but they wouldn't give him the chance until he had a diploma. He was 16, a true prodigy now, and his chess skills had only increased over the years. He had taken Ruby Fawn to the fair that year, and that was where he saw the sign proclaiming the Great Gizmo would be in attendance. He had drugged her over to the tent, the girl saying that she didn't want to see that creepy old thing, but he wanted a second chance at it. His father was still working in the grease pits of the train yard, but he knew his face would light up when he heard how his son had bested his old chess rival. The stakes had increased in 7 years, it seemed. It was now $8 to play the champ, but the winner got a $50 cash prize. $50 was a lot of money in 1926, but Charles wanted the satisfaction of besting this thing more than anything. Despite what his father wanted, he had been running numbers for John McClure and his gang for over a year, and some well-placed bets had left him flush with cash. "Good luck, young man," said the barker, and Charles was surprised to find that it was the same barker as before. Time had not been kind to him. His suit was now faded, his hat frayed around the rim, and he'd put on weight which bulged around the middle and made the suit roll, spoiling the uniform direction of the stripes. Despite that, it was still him, and he grinned at Charles as he took his familiar seat. This time, the match was a little different. Charles had increased in skill, and he saw through many of the traps Gizmo set for him. The audience whispered quietly behind him, believing that the Great Gizmo had met his match, but the real show was just beginning. Charles had taken several key pieces, and as he took a second rook, the thing's eyes sparkled, and it bent down as if to whisper something to him. The crowd would not have heard it. Its voice was too low, but the Great Gizmo whispered a secret to Charles that would stick with him forever. "Charles, this will not be our last game. We will play 8 more times before the end." It was given in a tone of absolute certainty, not an offhanded statement made to get more of Charles's hard-earned money. Charles looked mystified, not sure if he had actually heard what the thing had said, and it caused him to flub his next move and lose a piece he had not wanted to. Charles persevered, however, pressing on and taking more pieces, and just as he believed that victory was within his grasp, the thing spoke again. "Charles, you will live far longer than you may wish to." Again, it was spoken in that tone of absolute assuredness, and it caused Charles to miss what would have been obvious. The Great Gizmo won after 2 more moves, and Charles was again defeated. "Better luck next time," said the barker, and even Charles's date told him that he had done really well. Charles knew that he would never be great until he beat this machine, though. The pieces appeared. Charles set his up, and they began what would be their 4th game. Charles, strategically meeting the machine's offensive plays with his own practiced gambits, would gladly admit that the 3 games he had played against the Great Gizmo had improved his chess game more than any other matches he had ever played. Charles had faced old-timers in the park, grand masters at chess tournaments, and everything in between. Despite it all, the Great Gizmo never ceased to amaze and test his skill. Charles tried not to think of that last match. It was a match where Charles had done the one thing he promised he would never do. He had cheated. The Great Gizmo had become something of a mania in him after he had lost to it a second time. He'd gone to college, married his sweetheart, and began a job that paid well and wasn't terribly difficult. With his business acumen, Charles had been placed as the manager of a textile mill. Soon, he had bought it and was running the mill himself. Charles had turned the profits completely around after he had purchased the mill, seeing what the owner was doing wrong and fixing it when the mill belonged to him. He'd come a long way from the little kid who sat in the tent at Coney Island, but that tent was never far from his mind. Charles had one obsession, and it was chess. Even his father had told him he took the game far too seriously. He and his father still played at least twice a week, and it was mostly a chance for the two to talk. His father was not able to work the train yard anymore. He'd lost a leg to one of the big locomotives when it had fallen out of the hoist onto him, but that hardly mattered. His father lived at the home that Charles shared with his wife, a huge mansion on the main street of town, and his days were spent at leisure now. "You're the best chess player I've ever met, Charlie, but you take it too seriously. It's just a game, an entertainment, but you treat every chess match like a war." Charles would laugh when he said these things, but his father was right. Every chess match was a war, and the general behind all those lesser generals was the Great Gizmo. He had seen the old golem in various fairs and sideshows, but he had resisted the urge to go and play again. He couldn't beat him, not yet, and when he did play him, he wanted to be ready. He had studied chess the way some people study law or religion. He knew everything, at least everything that he could learn from books and experience, but it appeared he had one more teacher to take instruction from. Charles liked to go to the park and play against the old-timers that stayed there. Some of them had been playing chess longer than he'd been alive, and they had found ways to bend or even break the established rules of strategy. On the day in question, he was playing against a young black man. He called himself Kenny, and when he had taken Charles's rook, something strange happened. The rook was gone, but so had his knight that had been beside it. Charles knew the knight had been there, but when he looked across the board, he saw that it was sitting beside the rook on Kenny's side. He still won the match. Charles was at a point where he could win with nearly any 4 pieces on the board. But when they played again, he reached out and caught Kenny by the wrist as he went to take his castle off the board. In his hand was a pawn as well, and Kenny grinned like it was all a big joke. Charles wasn't mad, though. On the contrary. The move had been so quick, so smooth, that he hadn't even seen it the first time. He wondered if it would work for a creature that did not possess sight. It might be just the edge that he was looking for. "Hey, man, we ain't playing for money or nothing. There's no need to get upset over it." "Show me," Charles asked, and Kenny was more than happy to oblige. Kenny showed him the move, telling him the piece he palmed always had to be on the right of the piece that you would take. If it's on the left, they focus on that piece. If it's on the right, though, then the piece is practically hidden by the one you just put down. You can't hesitate. It's got to be a smooth move. But if you're quick enough, and you're sure enough, it's damn near undetectable. Charles practiced the move for hours, even using it against his own father, something he felt guilty about. He could do it without hesitation, without being noticed, and he was proud of his progress, despite the trickery. He was practicing it for 2 years before he got the chance to take on the Great Gizmo again. By then, Charles was a master of not just chess, but of that little sleight of hand. He hadn't dared use it at any of the chess tournaments. The refs were just too vigilant, as were the players. But in casual games, as well as at the park, he had become undetectable by any but the most observant. He was good enough to do it without hesitation, and when he opened his paper and saw a squib that the Great Gizmo would be at Coney Island that weekend, right before going overseas for a 10-year tour, he knew this would be his chance. There was no fee to play against it this time. The barker was still there, but he looked a little less jolly these days. He was an old, fat man who had grown sour and less jovial. He looked interested in being gone from here, in getting to where he would be paid more for the show. He told Charles to take a spot in line, and as the players took their turns, many of them people Charles had bested already, they were quickly turned away with a defeat at the hands of the golem. The Great Gizmo looked downright dapper as he sat there, seeing that the man had gotten him a new robe and a feather for his journey. The eyes still sparkled knowingly, however, and Charles settled himself so as not to be thrown by any declaration of future knowledge this time. The pieces came out, and the game began. Charles did well at first. He was cutting a path through the Great Gizmo's defenses, and the thing again told him they would play 8 more times before the end. That was a constant, it seemed, but after that, the match turned ugly. The Great Gizmo recaptured some of his pieces and set them to burning. Charles was hurting, but still doing well. He took a few more, received his next expected bit of prophecy, and then the play became barbaric. The Great Gizmo was playing very aggressively, and Charles had to maneuver himself to stay 1 step ahead of the thing. He became desperate, trying to get the old golem into position, and when he saw the move, he took it. He had palmed a knight and a pawn when something unexpected happened. The Great Gizmo grabbed his hand, just as he had grabbed Kenny's, and it leaned down until its eyes were inches from his. It breathed out, its breath full of terrible smoke and awful prophecy, and Charles began to choke. The smoke filled his mouth, taking his breath, and he blacked out as he fell sideways. The thing let go of him as he fell, but his last image of the Great Gizmo was of its 2 expressive eyes watching him with disappointment. He'd been found wanting again, and Charles wondered before passing out if there would be a 4th time. Charles woke up 3 days later in the hospital. his wife rejoicing that God had brought him back to them. By then, the Great Gizmo was on a boat to England, out of his reach. The year after that, World War II would erupt, and Charles had feared that he would never get another match with this creature. The match began as it always did. Charles put aside the Great Gizmo's gambits, one at a time. He played brilliantly, thwarting the golem's best defenses, and then it came time to attack. He cut the Great Gizmo to shreds, his line all a tatter, and when he told him that they would play 8 games before the end, Charles knew he was advancing well. He had lost barely any pieces of his own, and as the thing began to set its later plans in order, he almost laughed. This was proving to be too easy. The Great Gizmo and the Barker had been in Poland when it fell to the Blitzkrieg, and the Great Gizmo had dropped off the face of the earth for a while. Charles had actually enlisted after Pearl Harbor, but not for any sense of patriotism. He had a mania growing in him, and it had been growing for years. He knew where the thing had last been, and he meant that he would find the Barker and his mysterious machine. The Army was glad to have him, and his time in college made it easy to become an officer after basic training. They offered him a desk job, something in shipping, but he turned them down. If he wanted to find the Great Gizmo, he would have to go to war. He had fought at Normandy and Paris and 100 other skirmishes, and that was where he discovered something astounding. Despite the danger that Charles put himself in, he didn't die. Charles was never more than slightly wounded, a scratch or a bruise, but sustained no lasting damage. He wondered how this could be, but then he remembered the words of the Great Gizmo. "You will live far longer than you may wish to." He returned home after the war, but the old construct never returned to America. It took a while for his contacts to get back on their feet, but eventually what he got were rumors and hearsay. He heard that Hitler had taken the thing, adding it to his collection of objects he believed to be supernatural. He heard it had been destroyed in a bombing run over Paris. He heard one of MacArthur's generals had taken it as a spoil of war, and many other unbelievable things. After the war, it was supposed to have been taken to Jordan, then to Egypt, to Russia, to South Africa, and finally back to Europe. But he never could substantiate these things. And all the while, Charles grew older, less sturdy, but he never died. He was over 100 years old now, 106 to be precise, but he could pass for a robust 50 most of the time. He had buried his wife, all 3 of his children, 2 of his grandchildren as well. He lost his youngest son to Vietnam and his oldest grandson to the Iraq War. He was trying to keep his great-grandson from enlisting. They all seemed to want to follow in his footsteps, but they couldn't grasp that he had not done this for his country. "Checkmate," he spat viciously as he conquered his old rival. He had gone to war not for his wife or the baby in her arms, or even for the one holding her hand. He had gone to war for this metal monstrosity and the evil prophecy that it held. "Well played," it intoned, and he hated the sense of pride that filled him at those words. "You may ask one question, any question, and I will answer it for you. You have defeated the Great Gizmo, and now the secrets of the universe are open to you." Some men would have taken this chance to learn the nature of time, the identity of God, maybe even the night's lotto numbers, but there was only one question that interested Charles. How much longer will I live? The Great Gizmo sat back a little, seeming to contemplate the question. "You will live for as long as there is a Great Gizmo. Our lives are connected by fate, and we shall exist together until we do not." Charles thought about that for a long time, though he supposed he had known all along what the answer would be. The man behind the counter looked startled when the old man approached him and asked to buy the Great Gizmo. "That old thing?" he asked, not quite believing it. "It's an antique, buddy. I picked it up in Maine, hoping it would draw in some extra customers, but it never did. Thing creeps people out." "It creeps me out, too, if I'm being honest. I guess I'd sell it to you for $1,500. That's what I paid for it, and I'd like to get at least what I paid back for the damn thing." Charles brought out a money clip and peeled $2,000 bills from it. He handed them to the man, saying he would have men here to collect it within the hour. "Hey, pal, you paid me too much. I only wanted—" "The rest is a bonus for finding something I've searched for my whole life." He called the men he had hired to move the thing and stayed there until they had it secured on the truck. Charles had a spot at the house for it, a room of other treasures that he had found while looking for the old golem. The walls were fire retardant, the floor was concrete, the ceiling was perfectly set to never fall or shift. Charles had been keeping a spot for the Great Gizmo for years, and now he would keep him and himself for as long as forever would last. Or at least, he reflected, for 4 more chess matches. Wasn't that what the Great Gizmo had promised him, after all?